On July 27th, nerds everywhere celebrated Gary Gygax's birthday. In the off chance that you don't know who I'm talking about, Gary Gygax was the co-creator, and as far as popular culture is concerned, is the creator of a tabletop role-playing game called Dungeons & Dragons. D&D pretty much is the grandfather of all things tabletop role-playing that we see today. It has inspired a lot of the video games that we play today, and I don't know of anybody who's writing in the fantasy genre that can't talk about times when they were teenagers playing D&D. From where I sit, I find myself in an interesting relationship with Dungeons & Dragons because I've been playing for a long, long time. It's really been something that's been a huge part of my life. But as a guy who is the president of a Christian nonprofit who uses gaming in a church context, D&D always has this weird place because even to this day, though it's drastically tapered off, I'm still getting emails. In fact, I just got one within the last month of a youth pastor asking me, is it okay for my kids to play D&D? I have a very concerned mom who is worried for her son. There's some things that I've been wrestling with and dealing with and really just seeking God about D&D and how it fits and why it's important. And it's always been there in the back of my head. It's always been something that I've fought for, always something that I have put out there and touted as a beautiful thing that needs to be done. But there was a conversation that I recently had with my wife about it that really codified some things for me. And because of the fact that, as I'm recording this, it's after Gary Gygax's birthday and before Gen Con, I just wanted to share a little bit with you guys about what that conversation looked like and really what I found out about myself by having it and what I kind of discovered about myself and really what God was showing me in that conversation. Before I get started, if you're a member of our community, if you're in the Tavern, which is our Facebook group, if you listen to our podcast, which is Game Store Profits, if you've been on our website, you at least partly heard a little bit about me and who I am and where I come from with some of the issues that I've dealt with since I was a kid. I will be trying to summarize that. I don't want to go into too much detail just because so many of you guys already know that story, but in case there's somebody who didn't, it's an important aspect of the rest of it, so sorry if you've heard this one already, but I kind of have to tell it again. For all intents and purposes, my childhood was pretty much as idyllic as you could get. I often joke that my neighborhood growing up is what happened if Mayberry RFD was invaded by yuppies. This area is pretty much, upper middle class to downright upper class. My parents worked real hard to make sure that my brothers and I never wanted for anything. We had all the toys we ever wanted. We never went without a meal, obviously. I had everything I could possibly want. And yet I discovered that when it comes to deeper issues, when it comes to the stuff that lives below surface, those issues are no respecters of person. They don't care if you've come from a good situation. They rear their ugly head and kind of try to wreck your life regardless of all of it. And that's exactly what it was like for me. Have you ever felt completely and totally worthless? I'm not talking about bad. I'm not talking about inferior. I'm talking about literally worthless. That you feel guilty about the fact that you are using the air that should be used by better people than you. That you somehow feel guilty about the fact that you exist in the place that you exist in the family you exist in the time you exist in, because somebody better should have it. That was my life. That was my mentality. I coined a term to describe the way I made my way through high school, and that was a party favor mentality. And if you'll allow me a weird little explanation of that, I call it the party favor mentality because when you're at a big party and things are going well, Nobody ever thinks to bring, like, noisemakers and props and silly things. Yet, if you go to a wedding and the DJ brings them out, people go nuts. They fight over them. I've actually seen fistfights over stupid little party favors at weddings. No one thinks to bring them. Though they are really happy when they show up. And I felt like a walking, talking party favor. I could convince myself that I would have value when I'm there. People liked me when I was there. I made jokes that made people laugh. And for a brief, shining moment, I had some kind of value. But then it went away. Because I started realizing that more and more times I heard about stories second and third hand because no one actually thought to include me in any of it. The only ones I participated in were the ones that I happened to be already in the area. And I found myself just hating the fact that I existed. So I know what you're probably thinking. Okay, here it comes. This is the part where Mike talks about how he met Jesus and how everything was great and he had a whole purpose in life and everything was wonderful. That's how these stories go, right? We get to the church line. Honestly, I mean, kinda. Because, yeah, I mean, it gets there eventually. But, no. That's not how the story goes. Because that didn't happen for years after. That didn't happen till way later. No, what happened first was gaming. And playing D&D. It was sitting down for what were awkward lone wolf Dragonlance games. I've never seen the Dragonlance sourcebook to this day, but that's what we were playing. We were goofy junior high kids learning to play D&D. So I don't know if I'd consider that really my start in gaming. At least not gaming proper. It started later. I was probably about 16 or 17. I usually say 16 when I started gaming proper. But it really made a huge impact on me because I wasn't a party favor anymore. I was a party member. I was expected. I was somebody they looked forward to seeing, that they couldn't actually move forward without me. Like if I missed game day, that put everything on pause because they didn't want to move forward without me. I had a place. And honestly, I say this, I've said it a couple times, and I continue to say it without reservation and without any kind of irony. Gaming saved my life. It would be about a year later from when I started really gaming hard. It would be about a year later that I found myself at my existential crisis that almost had me taking my own life. But long before I got there, I was already that down. I was already that in that place. I'd been there for years. I was only just sitting around waiting for the right thing to toss me over the edge. Gaming got me to a place where I could know that there was something for me. I can tell you about the story of me coming to faith. And if you want to hear that, hit me up on an email or on Twitter or something. I'll tell you all over the place about how that happened and how that changed everything. But one thing I've discovered is that God actually used playing D&D to get me to that place. To show me a small version of what he had for me. And while my gaming has improved, because anybody who games as a teenager, who still games later on in life, will tell you that I can't even remember how terrible I was back then. It was awful. It was bad. It was awkward. I'd like to say that I'm better at playing characters now and creating interesting stories. I'd like to say that I've improved over the past, really long time of gaming. Let's just put it that way. I still find myself discovering new things about who I am and what I think about life, and even have that depicted in the games and the characters that I play. I was recently, again, calling back to that conversation I had with my wife, I talked about what the character who has become, even over a decade of playing role-playing games, even almost up to 2. I think I'm almost up to 2 decades of playing role-playing games. In fact, yeah, I am. I just did the math in my head. I'm still learning stuff about myself. And I say learning with a little bit of hesitation just because technically some of it is stuff that I know and some of it's stuff that people have told me. But in playing it out, I have to reteach myself that these things are true about me. Because one thing that is really obnoxious about depression, whether situational or chemical or whatever, the thing about depression is that it doesn't go away. And you can tell yourself a thing for ages, but you still have to reteach yourself that that's true. I was in that conversation with my wife. I was talking about the character that has become pretty much my favorite character I've ever rolled to date. The dwarf bard, Drogan Anvilsong. And to not bore you with the character story above the stories that you've probably already heard, Drogan's story really did take on, he didn't start that way, but he took on a lot of my own story, just in the way he played out and the decisions I made with him. And I started realizing things, and I started explaining to my wife about how Drogan really showed me who I was and who I am. Drogan never allowed anyone to speak ill of someone else or allow anyone to think that they are superior to someone else. He wouldn't allow it. He believed that everyone was deserving of a fair shake. He basically would throw himself, even though he was a bard. And anybody who's played these games know that, well, apparently the new version of D&D has something about this, but in old school, and this we were playing in Pathfinder, which is definitely not the case, bard is not a combat class, but there I made him, and he was all about just throwing himself into combat. And there were a couple of times where we were playing and it went real bad for him. And there was one time when it was over a play-by post, so it was all about forums and stuff. And there were people who were messaging me in between posts saying, "You need to get out. Dude, get Drogan out of there. You need to stop." And I looked at them and I said, I couldn't. I said, there's no way that Drogan would stop if there was somebody else that was in trouble. That he would sooner die defending somebody else than to realize that he could save himself and let them die. He would sooner die himself. And as I'm explaining this to my wife, she's just bawling. And she looked at me and said, "You do realize you do that for me all the time, right?" And I didn't. That was something that I had to reteach myself. She went on to basically say that I do that for a lot of people, apparently. And I don't always realize that. I'd like to say that I always know that that's me, because it's something that I want to be part of me. Because, again, to bring the God aspect into it, I want to follow the one who died for me. And so, yeah, I'd like to say that I love sacrificially, and I would sooner die myself than see somebody else come to harm. I'd like to say that about myself, and there my wife is, hearing me talk about my stupid dwarf bard, and bawling, because I was basically playing me. Now, before this video gets passed around and used as an example as to how everybody in the church should be playing D&D and there's nothing wrong with it and everything's fine, guys, here's my disclaimer. Yeah, the devil can use D&D. He can use anything. He's a jerk that way. I don't think that this game is inherently, in and of itself, anything evil or wrong. But that doesn't mean that we just throw discernment out the window and say, everything's awesome, there's never a problem, no one will ever have a problem, let's move forward. I have personally had to tell people you should not play D&D, whether it's because they show some kind of obsessive disorders happening there where they, life is all about playing, or there have been times when I've talked to the person and I realized that the line between fiction and reality was getting blurred. And even if it's blurred the tiniest bit, you shouldn't play this game. That disclaimer out of the way, I really think, for me, the positives of the game vastly outnumber any negatives. And I'd ask you to really sit down and consider the possibility of playing it. And I think you should find somebody that you trust who will ask you important questions and challenge you and make you think, but do so in a way that is still safe and controlled and won't go into places that really make you uncomfortable. A good DM worth his salt has their players in mind the entire time. I take stuff out and add stuff all the time for that purpose. And if you find yourself in that place that I was, and heck, where I still am on days when I'm just too tired to fight or I'm sick or whatever, I want you to make sure that you talk to somebody about it. I'll put myself out there. You can find me on the internet, but I'm not a professional counselor. I've been in ministry for a long time, and I've picked up a good bit of advice just in life and in talking to other people, but I'm not a professional counselor. I'm happy to work with the guys at the Bodama group and folks like them. They are professional counselors. You should look them up. But I want you to know that there is a story being told, and you are in it. And the story is infinitely better because you're a part of it. That the plot can't proceed without you in it. That we will hold the game until you come back. Because we don't want to move forward without you. You have a place here. And I will be the first one to be real excited when you show up to play. Happy belated Gary Gygax Day. For those of you going to Gen Con in a couple days, I hope you have a blast. And I will see you guys real soon.